Information influences our capabilities, our opportunities, our interests, and our potential. But we are not in control of this information and are influenced by those who control it. Movement is underway to move these controls and influence to the user. What is possible when we are connected and in control? This is the quest. This is the emergence. Welcome to The Emergence, a podcast discussing what is possible when we are connected and in control. Today I have Era and GunDB founder Mark Nadal on to talk about the technology he's building and how this will help build a more resilient society. I've been following and engaging with Mark on Twitter for some time and wanted to bring him on to The Emergence to unpack his ideas and see how they speak to the core concepts behind the emergence, which is to use technology and systems of thought to provide a better balance between people, business, and government. The emergence is all about solving problems to help improve the human condition. And as I have been digging into Mark's philosophies, what he has built and what he plans on building, I see him as a significant player in helping build a future where the best of us is harnessed to help build better systems to represent more of us more completely. So without further ado, I'd like to bring on Mark. How are you doing, Mark?
Hey, doing all right. It is 2020 after all.
Yeah, it is.
Having me on the show.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. And I've been, we've been going back and forth a little bit on Twitter. So I really like what you do. And I've kind of created a little bit of an outline to go over some of these things. I want to keep it pretty tight here for you. And so first of all, I just want to start talking about the overall thread of what you're involved with. So the company that you're involved with is Era. That's more or less the umbrella, and you have GunDB under that and some other things. So you want to talk a little bit about what you have set up, your company?
So Era is a company focused on changing economics in the next 9 years, which is a pretty ambitious goal, and we'll, I'm sure, get into that, the transition from mercantilism into capitalism, the struggles between capitalism and socialism later on in the episode. But those transitions happen a lot faster than people think, even though they don't happen very often. And then we're technologically focused. Oftentimes the trigger for those things is through new advances, industrial revolution, specific types of technology that level the playing field and amplify people's voices. So there's a lot in that, but we're a technologically focused company trying to improve the economics for humanity.
Oh, excellent. And now you're, I guess it looks like you're funded by Mark Benioff with Salesforce and Tim Draper, and you have some interesting people behind you.
Yes, I've had the privilege of having a lot of lunches with some billionaires and some really funny stories to tell in those meetings, and I've been very blessed to be funded by several of them. Yes.
Yeah, and that's there seems like there's obviously a major thread with open source. I see that Mozilla, you're involved with Mozilla as well. So talk a little bit about the fact of the open source and your technology in the GunDB framework. We can start digging into that a little bit. GunDB is more of a peer-to-peer connection of what you're building on the database side. Can you give us a little bit of a better idea of what you're building with GunDB?
Yes, peer-to-peer as in more like BitTorrent, less like Bitcoin. There's a lot of people talking about decentralized peer-to-peer technology, and they think that's only blockchain. Blockchain is pretty far distance from what we're trying to do. Just to give people a general picture, the decentralized microcosm has three main camps. There is blockchain, which has the values of Ayn Rand style greed. Then there is the camp of privacy, which is pushed by the crypto community. And crypto there means cryptography, as in secrecy. Privacy, not crypto as in blockchain. People get these two pieces mixed up, and it's very poor from an understanding standpoint. So examples of some crypto or privacy-based technologies, stuff like Signal. Again, crypto means cryptography, not token. And then there is D-Web, which the value of the DWeb camp is openness or inclusivity. So there are 3 different value systems that are all competing with each other, and they're all decentralized technologies. And we're focused on, yes, a lot of cryptography, a lot of privacy, but also on inclusivity and openness. That doesn't mean your data is getting leaked in any way, shape, or form. Your data will be end-to-end encrypted, but we're trying to create more open systems. And open not only is referencing inclusivity, but also the source code itself for technologists and developers out there. Even lay people, you can go in and audit the code to make sure that the code is not doing nefarious things to you. It's very difficult to tell what Facebook may be doing with your data if their proprietary servers are hidden and you can't review the code. Now, a lot of people are not developers, and even developers have a hard time auditing code because it can be very confusing what the code is doing. But another key piece about open source and open systems is that they're competitive. If there's something you don't like, even if you don't know where in the code it is there, in the code that the problem exists, you can always what's called fork the code and create competing systems. And so this really goes into this idea of anti-monopoly that's key and core to our view of decentralization. Now I can expand into 12 more categories there, what the different types of economic license, the different types of structures behind open source. But I'll pause and we'll get to that.
Yeah, no problem. Well, how does this relate to you talked about these, with the DWeb, Ethereum's Vitalik Buterin, what he's doing, and what about what Tim Berners-Lee is up to on the Solid Pods with is more of a domain-centric connection? How do you equate GunDB to what he's trying to do with that to reinvent the future of the web?
I love Tim Berners-Lee. I really enjoy the Solid team. I've met Tim a couple times at the Internet Archive decentralized web meetups. And I've gotten to know a couple people on their team. They're fantastic people. However, yes, I do disagree quite strongly with the domain model. The domain model, I think, is pretty explicitly why walled gardens emerged and we got centralization again with Facebook. Even take a fantastic example of email. Email, you can have multiple different providers, Hotmail, MSN, Yahoo, Gmail. However, unfortunately, the company that kind of doubles down and provides the best user experience with the largest storage space, the company that's able to provide that much capital upfront for the users to seduce them onto the network, become the monopolistic, monolithic players. And now, even though email is federated, there's emails just as invasive as the other systems. And it's not very portable either. Imagine trying to switch from Gmail to Hotmail. I'm sure you can do it, but so I love Tim Berners-Lee. I know several people on the team and I've met Tim, but I don't think the domain-based federated model is the right direction because we've already gone down that route and it's ended where we're at now. I don't think that technology play is going to go anywhere different this time.
Yeah, and that's and I've been following them for a couple of years now, actually about 3 years. I met him at a conference, a Doug Engelbart conference a couple of years ago, just meet and greet. And I've been on GitHub following what the team's doing on Solid, and that's the thing that's why one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on board is really to unpack that a little better, have a better idea on that. And Mitzi Laszlo, who was the Solid Pods manager, she's no longer the manager anymore, but I'd been following a couple of her essays, and she was even talking about the fact of the UN being involved with the domain structure, and I think what we have to be extremely careful about, and especially in the eyes of what I'm building with the emergence, as far as unpacking these ideas, is just take a look at what we've done in the past and extrapolate that in the future and be careful about who is going to be in control. Now, the thing is, if you have an anarchist view where people are completely in control. Systems have to have some level of control. Obviously, our nervous system has control. That's like cybernetics talks about that in systems. But how much of that control are we willing to really give over to the trust of those other than ourselves? And that's what's interesting to me, is that you seem to be one of the very few that are truly building something that is truly decentralized. Because blockchain, when I look at blockchain and the fact of proof of stake and proof of work, what Vitalik is working on now with the proof of work model, and it still seems to be driven by capital and money. I'm interested in your views on that. Is that, with the proof of stake model, you have these huge server farms in China being built to build blocks. And then with the proof of work model, it's then the people that are able to buy into it to help build blocks. So is yours different than that? The fact that just talk a little bit about that.
Yes. So a useful way to think of these systems is whether you can independently interact with somebody separate from the network. So Bluetooth as a technology is something that should pop into your head right away. Like, I don't have to be connected to the internet to talk to my speaker phone.
Beautiful.
And this is a key difference between really what peer-to-peer should mean versus blockchain. So I would argue that blockchain is not peer-to-peer.
Yep.
Because you have to be connected to some other network in order to transact with the person you're interacting with. And now that's not necessarily a bad thing, especially if that network is not monopolistic or is not authoritarian. As long as that network, is more robust and resilient to failure because it's controlled and operated and owned by many different people and groups and organizations. That's fantastic, but that is distinct from the technology itself being peer-to-peer. So I think that maybe just gives a more clarifying lens to think about what peer-to-peer as a technology means. Does the technology let you do a more Bluetooth-like interaction with something? Is it offline first or local first? Or do you always have to be connected to some other system, whether that system is ethical or not, out there versus here?
Yes. And actually, a team with Elastos. Are you familiar with Elastos on the blockchain side of it?
Sorry, Elastos makes me think of Elasticsearch, that there is some Elastic OS operating system, but I'm guessing that's not what you're referencing.
No, it's a blockchain, and they seem to be pretty. I've researched them on the web. They'd reached out to me, and I actually asked some difficult questions, and then they didn't reach back out to me. So it's the thing that I've really been trying to get to on the really to understand what are these technologies that we're going to have at our tool set. I really envision these tools as a spade, as a shovel, and it's not about giving us something. It's giving us something to help dig for the truth, to be able to dig for our own better realities. And it's more of something that can be universal. But if that shovel is controlled by, whose hands are on that shovel? And that's really what I'm trying to unpack and talking to all these different providers and all these different technologists on this. And why I am struck with your technology definitely seems to be one that seems to be more truly decentralized from what I can tell. And so on the other side, so there's GunDB, and that's managing the connection on the more of the kind of the physical side. And then you have an algorithm that you're creating, AX, Advanced Exchange Equation, of my research. So I apologize if I'm going into areas that maybe aren't current, or is that something that's the algorithm that you're building right now on top of GunDB?
All of the above, yes.
Okay.
You've done good research. Let me say a couple things in these tools analogy, because I think that's very, very useful. Yes, I'm trying to give you and other people on the show more tools. I'm not saying you need to use the way I view these things, but more tools to think about these systems. So for instance, the microcosm of decentralization being split into privacy, openness, and greed is a very useful tool in terms of understanding the values and the types of tools that emerge. So it's a tool for how you analyze these systems. In the same way, I was just presenting this other tool of thinking about systems as being either more like Bluetooth or local or offline or local first, distinct from decentralization, which is a type of ownership. Another tool that you kind of mentioned running into this next question, and then I'll actually get to the question, is actually stepping back and saying, what are the value systems of different cultures? Because this then gives you a context of how to put into perspective not just governments, but also tools themselves. So I've found that the tools of freedom, more peer-to-peer technology, only stop the future that we do not want. So it does not necessarily create the future we do want. It just stops the world we don't want. So decentralization or freedom only stops the future we do not want. It is not necessarily a tool for creating the future that we do want. And that's then, yes, coming into what some of these other algorithms are about, separate from the underlying technology. So first you want the foundation to stop the bad future, but then you have to create tools that give you the future that you do want. And the values behind the future that you do want is on fairness and fusion. So these three F's, freedom, fairness, and fusion, represent pretty much every single culture around the world. The US is very freedom heavy, and you'll find that a lot of other cultures just do not value freedom at all. And it's not part of their mentality. They do not make reasoning decisions off of that. However, you also see that the West, the United States especially, does not understand things like fusion, which is a very Eastern concept. And so to better understand the incentives of not only governments, ecosystems, companies, as well as individuals, it's useful to have a tool in understanding the cultural values, as well as the technological ones, as well as the earlier ones that I mentioned. So these are all tools to look at the world, make assessments, make decisions, and hopefully have a faster way to bring clarity to your thinking.
Yes, and I was curious when I was doing research on your AX algorithm. Is that anything to do with the Nash equilibrium algorithm at all? I just kind of came across that, and I'm not a mathematician. Believe me, I'm not that good at math, and I know that's your base. But that algorithm, what you're building, and I've heard you on other podcasts and YouTube. That algorithm is a very interesting thing to me because when I was researching the Nash equilibrium, they were talking about to determine mathematically and logically the actions that participants of a game should take to secure the best outcomes for themselves. It's that idea about outcomes and not forcing outcomes, but allowing people to be involved through these algorithms, not controlling them, because I think that's obviously the dance you're going to have to be aware of, because we can have AI and AI can control us, or we can actually help us augment. So talk a little bit more about that algorithm and the fact of being able to allow for outcomes for ourselves.
Oh, that's such a perfect framing. I don't even know if I need to answer that. Yes, AI has a tool, algorithms. It's a tool for augmenting the decision making that you make, right? Not, I'm just going to steal your response. I wouldn't have thought to use the word augment, but it's perfect. Versus monopolistic or monolithic or centralized institutions, Facebook, China, etc., use the AI to make decisions for you on your behalf. And that's the ethical line. Yes, the technology is very powerful for giving us better clarity into the decisions we make, not for making decisions for us. I love game theory. Apply it all over the place. It's very important. And the nice thing about game theory is it's not. I mean, you could use it for manipulative means, but it's not itself manipulative, because game theory is talking about the game of games, and the games that are going to win are the games that create the best types of competitions. So in contrast to games that may win, but large audiences, but lose, are ones that maybe gather large audiences, but are centralized. There's this great book called Non-Zero Sum by Robert Wright, which is an anthropological view of the historical development of different types of civilizations and how some of these civilizations grew, even technologically, very fast, but became rather centralized and then fell apart versus more spread out civilizations. I'm not going to get distracted by that because that's going away from your actual question. But yeah, if we're getting into my actual algorithms, Axe, Era, Gun, buckle up because that's going to be a little bit longer of a discussion and comes with a lot of nuance that I like to get into with which is the mathematical details. I don't know how many people that's going to lose.
Yeah, and that's fine. I mean, I've got, but I wanted to at least touch on that because I think that's, obviously you're familiar with Ben Goertzel and what he's doing with Singularity, Net.io, and decentralizing the algorithm. I mean, the AI, decentralizing AI.
I'm not familiar with Ben.
What's that?
I'm not familiar with Ben.
Okay, yeah, Ben Goertzel is somebody that's interesting that you should look at. He's the one that's working on the Sophia robot. He's working on the AI team, but he's also doing something where he's building a framework to decentralized artificial intelligence. So as opposed to allowing McDonald's and GE are the ones that can really afford to use significant benefits of AI, building tools that people can actually harness that themselves for smaller teams to build better implementations of AI for smaller means. And that's something that I've been following for a while, is the fact that, it's again, why I'm attracted to the things that you're working on, and Ben Goertzel and some of these things, is the fact of giving people that spade and not a bulldozer, you know what I mean? Giving them, very specific tools to allow them to dig inside of what they can offer in exchange of value. And that's I don't want to go too far away from this, but when I think about your algorithm, when I think about your infrastructure, it's ultimately about allowing people to gain access to values that they have within themselves that naturally they would not, because we are constricted naturally. I couldn't be talking to you, Mark, naturally, right? I'd have to fly and go see you. So these tools that can allow us, but the thing is, the way that I see these tools now and the implementation of AI, it's very opaque. It's not really digging inside our values. And there's something with your algorithm too that I'd researched on the fact of allowing philanthropic, events from people with money. So you're encouraging people that do have resources to be able to provide those resources to others to then help build societies that are more properly functioning from within people. So I know I'm kind of going all over the place here, but it's the idea of this algorithms and the AI that's able to help people exchange value within.
Yeah, okay. So many thoughts on that. Maybe we'll hit them one by one. First, on the AI stuff, I'm so glad that there are other people working on creating decentralized systems for that. I do want to step back and comment, though, that AI is a next step, and it's a step we should embrace and go towards as fast as possible, as long as it's not monopolistic, because that will lead to the type of Elon Musk predicted disasters. But if it's decentralized, yeah. However, there's still this layer beforehand, which is governments and Facebook have asymmetric access to information. Now, yes, even in the United States, a lot of information is public record. Everything from telephone books to marriage records to where you live. But because you have to go to the actual courthouses to get the public records, what winds up happening is companies just data mine it, keep it proprietary, and then try to charge you if you ever want to access that information, even though it's potentially free in public. And or then wind up buy and sell this information behind the scenes, or have types of access matching patterns. So like Facebook doesn't actually sell your data, because then they wouldn't have anybody come back to them a month later. They're just selling matchmaking to people with similar data. They don't actually sell your data itself. Yeah. So there's this very important first layer, which is just giving people the same type of access to information and data that exists out there that governments and corporations already have access to. And that's leveling the playing field from the get-go, making people as powerful as Facebook and Google combined, them as an individual as powerful as those types of corporations. So the first very important step is just making sure that there's a level playing field and that your voice is more amplified to be heard for your ideas and your concepts. I'm not saying your ideas may be good, they might be terrible, but leveling the playing field in the first place. And by leveling the playing field, I'm not talking about equality of outcome, because that also produces really bad economic games.
Historically, yes.
And while we do want a type of equality of outcome in certain areas, because that sounds like a more fair society, unfortunately, those games do not lead to a rising tide for all of humanity, because when there's an equality of outcome, it's very easy to cheat the system. And then that leads to a downward spiral in those types of economic games. And you can like simulate these things, like we were talking about earlier with game theory and stuff like that. So the opposite thing is having an increasing wealth divide is also called the Pareto efficiency, I think, Pareto optimization, which is that everything winds up coming to an 80-20 divide. And that's not that's not a good thing, because in any debt-based game, any transactional game where I give you Bitcoin and I lose it, or I give you dollars and I lose it, any transactional game, it is true that there very quickly, over just a couple generations, a few generations, the game becomes exploitable, and that there's a certain threshold where the least talented person born into resources and wealth effectively cannot lose the game. However, the most talented people born in abject poverty only can go so far in social mobility, economic mobility, even with luck behind them. So there's these two extremes that have been stereotyped as capitalism and socialism. And obviously, depending upon which camp you're already on, you want to look at the winning parts, the good parts of your game, and you usually dismiss or ignore the bad parts. And I'm saying, hey, the fact that these two games have inverted good parts to bad parts means we can actually take the synthesis of both games and produce a new game that has the best of both parts and none of the bad parts of either of the two.
Yes.
And that's then where, yes, I'm introducing a new economic game called Freeism. But yeah, in order to get there, we have to go through Axe, we have to go through Era, we have to go through several of these other algorithms just technologically to build up to that point. And Freeism is that new game where the most concise summary would just be that you redefine wealth to mean how much somebody has distributed or given or helped people, rather than how much somebody has allocated, hoarded, or collected. But there's a lot of very nuanced details in that.
Well, and I just can't agree with you more on that. And actually for everybody to know, there's a really good video of you opt out of money for fun and profit on YouTube. So if people want to explore those, it's a great encapsulation of you talking about these ideas. And it's a powerful it's a powerful tool set to think about, because I too am I know I've heard you say that you're not a capitalist or a socialist, and I don't even like the isms, and I don't really want to be put into one category. All I want to do is I want to help people engage and tap into their potential. And I don't think that's on a 50-yard line, one side or the other. It's just too binary to me. And I think that capitalism really has, since the 70s, I've been doing some more research on this. Since the 70s, this whole shareholder primacy, where the stakeholders have really taken a back seat, it's just continuing to create more of that divide. And I have a lot of conservative friends and family that I absolutely love, and I have friends that are on the left that I absolutely love. But there is something about the thread of capitalism, that this whole shareholder primacy part of that, where these shareholders are not intrinsically involved in the business. They're not digging the trenches. They're not building the code. It's kind of a game, a monopoly. And I think that we're moving away from that. And some of these ideas that you have on freeism, where you kind of break outside of those rule sets that we've been taught to continue to thrive under. Well, some of us thrive under. It's just super interesting to me. And really on this, I see this actually on one of your things with freeism, as free peoples, free products for a flourishing planet. And I do really think that is pretty, pretty profound. And another thing that I did see here under your Wealth, A New Era of Economics, a paper that you'd written. By the way, everything that I'm citing, I'm going to put in the podcast episode notes so people can access it and so they can dig into you more. I saw something here that a Hegelian solution is quite simple, though: to incentivize the production and distribution as the definition of wealth, rather than it being the result of a transaction. And you were talking about that, and that's the thing that really started to hit me, is that everything is so transaction based. Money. I mean, can you talk a little bit outside that of the fact of this post money economic model? Just a little bit. I know we don't really have you don't have a lot of time to go into that, but just talk about that a little bit more.
Yes, you need to be wary of anybody proposing a new game, especially people naive like me that are optimistic.
Yeah.
Because for every introduction of a new game, there's potentially more loopholes or edge cases or flaws than the one that currently exists. So there's a lot of people out there who are, looking for this type of transformation and change, and it's why they're buying into the other side, right? A lot of my left friends that are going right, and a lot of my right friends are going left, because they haven't tried the other game yet. It's also why UBI, Universal Basic Income, is particularly appealing to a lot of people, because they feel like it's a new game. But a lot of these new games just fundamentally have mathematical problems in them that lead to economic collapse. So be very wary of anything I say, and think through it. Don't just buy into the good hopes and dreams. Now that I made that disclaimer, I'm going to tell you about the good hopes and dreams of the system I'm trying to create. Just coming at it from then, unfortunately, a mathematical and technological foundation, brick by brick, laying that up to actually create it. So let me pause. You ended on an important question, and I was kind of going back to where you started at in your question. I wanted to now pick up the thread at the end of your question.
Well, yeah, that was a Hegelian solution, where I was talking about rather it be the result of a transaction. So, and this is the important part to me: to incentivize the production and distribution as a definition of wealth, rather than it being the result of transaction. So it's this thing about, and this is a thing that I've always talked about, exchange of value. I had somebody on a social network. I was saying there's value beyond money. And they said, well, what value is it? It's like, Jesus, I can go knit a sweater from somebody and they find value in that sweater. And I'm validated from the fact that they like me knitting that sweater. So there's an enormous amount of value that's trapped inside of us beyond money, right? I mean,
yeah. And this is where we have to go step by step through a bunch of heuristics, a bunch of mental models, in order to clarify the thinking around this. First, both socialism and capitalism are transactional. Okay, by transactional, we mean any debt-based system. All right, see, even debt is a bad way to frame it. Any system where your gain is at the loss of somebody else. Now, it's just what your ethics are that justify whether you're a socialist or a capitalist. Whether you think it's okay to steal from the rich to give to the poor, whether you think it's okay to steal from the middle class to give to the middle class. Depending upon your ethics, it's just who's getting exploited or oppressed or cheated. That is your justification. But both socialism and capitalism are zero-sum transactional games. They're both debt-based. There's some sort of debt coming from somebody. Now, there are these other games that are becoming very popular: Airbnb, Uber, Reputation, social credit system in China, reputational currencies. Reputational currencies, even though they're non-transactional, even though they're post-scarce, they still have lots of fundamental problems to them. And I've discussed this on other talks, and I kind of go into it in more detail in the opt-out of money for fun and profit talk. So I'm probably not going to explore that here. Just because there is value other than money doesn't mean that those are good avenues to chase, pursue, or measure, or analyze, or that they will produce, even if they work mathematically, or that they'll produce less dystopian states than what we have now. So just laying out the groundwork for everybody on how you think about these systems,
Yes.
Whether they're transactional, whether they're debt-based, whether they are post-scarce, scarce, and what types of results, reputational systems they produce. And Uber and Airbnb is kind of a easy way for people to think about stuff now, because they've done a good job of balancing capitalism and reputational systems. So if you want to, that might be the most concrete way to explore some of these economic stuff next, or it can jump straight into what you were talking about with my system, the incentives of both production and distribution.
Well, I saw in another one of your talks, specifically talking about Uber, that you could envision a future of removing the middleman of Uber. And that might dovetail into the fact of what GunDB and so it's that thing that I think about with movies. I've done a little bit of filmmaking in the past, and I love movies. So the fact of you have somebody making a movie and you have somebody consuming a movie, and everything in the middle of that is influence. So and it's kind of stepping on the possibilities of discovering those movies. Something I've messed with, and I actually am in the process of looking at exploring, developing, is something I call word explorers, of being able to tap inside content and manage those words and align those words that reside within content, so I can discover content, movies, audio that really moves me. And so when you're talking about Uber, the fact of removing Uber, and that of people have cars and people need to move from one place to the other. So it's this thing about the fact of decentralization, of really taking out these middlemen or women to some degree, right?
Yes. And so here's a rant against the failure of technologists, is that open source versions to like Photoshop, they're important, they're great. But the most important tooling that we could provide to humanity is open source versions of Uber and Airbnb, not having a monopolistic centralized company. And hey, this is, Spotify and Apple Music as well, where they take 30% cuts of the people's earnings. That's a pretty terrible taxation policy, because then that hard working driver or musician or host is then also having to pay whatever the earnings are after the cut that the monopolistic company is taking. Then they have to pay another 30% plus tax to the government. So now you're taxed at 60% minimum between Apple, Uber, Airbnb, and the government. And that means the people who are actually providing the labor economy are now trying to survive off of sub 30%. So there's a whole other talk I could go into around our games and Photoshop, creative tools. Creative tools are extraordinarily important. I don't want to undermine that. In fact, we're throwing a lot of resources into creating creative tools because it's one of the most important pieces to combat political dystopia, is to have a foundation of creative expression is necessary for economic and civil opportunity. If you don't have creative expression, you cannot have discussions around increasingly complicated subjects because you need higher bandwidth ways to communicate ideas on increasingly complicated ideas. So that's just a quick glimpse at a whole separate conversation we could have that's not related to any of this economics stuff. But no, most of the open source tools that exist out there are, no offense, just kind of bad versions of Photoshop and these other things. And that's important. We need those tools, but
well, we need these tools without the controls. I mean, the controls outside of our own interests, and
that's what I'm saying. I mean, Photoshop is now online, so yes, there is a type of control, but like Photoshop was still offline. Like you bought it and you used it, and there was no control. It was on your computer, and that was important. Okay, but the more important piece, yes, of what we need open source technology for is not open source versions of Adobe software that technologists have focused on for 30 years. Is open source versions of networks, open source versions of Airbnb, yes, open source versions of Uber, because those are the things that are public goods and public infrastructure that we, the people, need access to. Those are much more important to the well-being of states, societies, and individuals. And yes, that's more what I sorry, for anybody listening, this is just mostly a rant against technologists being attracted to creating open source technology around the wrong or less important matters.
Yeah, and that's extremely important, because that's the one thing that I've said in my introduction to my podcast, my first episode, is that I want to be the grain of sand in the eye of these, because we can be critical of it, because here's the thing: look what's been rendered. The capabilities. I mean, Douglas Engelbart was building a truly decentralized collaborative network back in 1967, 1968. With his NLS system. And I'm a huge fan of Engelbart, and I've been researching him quite a bit. And how far we could have come. When you look at his Mother of All Demos in 1968 and the things that he was doing, truly collaborative networking. And we don't have that. And my thing is, way a search engine should be is that I have my pods, or my domains of information, and I should be able to then download my own algorithm to find and tune the results of what's on the web, as opposed to only exclusively using Google or Bing's algorithm. Why can't I use my own algorithm that I can test and use and tune and align, so where I can find things that really resonate within me, as opposed to relying on what Facebook and Twitter and Google is telling me what resonates with me. And that's where I think that, this do no evil from Google we've started to see this shift where where our eyes are starting to be uncovered of what has been built for us has been built for us, not with us. And we need to have these technologies be built with us to inspire us. And I use the 4 pillars of human condition. I call it CAPE: creativity, awareness, productivity, and empathy. And if we don't have those things resonating within us, and the tools aren't actually, our spades, our shovels don't have those branded on there, then we're just going to end up with the same of where we've been. And that's where I'm worried about. And that's why I like digging in and talking to people like you, because you do seem to be one that is actually engaging at that level.
Thank you. Cake is a really good mental model. You should promote that more. So yes, this is where we can find the vampire and stab it in the heart, because the economics here, and the reason why, if you're a developer, things like Lisp and Scheme didn't win out over C and C++, or the reference you're making to to Engelbart and his technological systems don't wind up panning out is this very important concept of, it relates to Pareto optimization, something I mentioned earlier, but these economic games between post-scarce and scarce systems. And the way I'm going to try and simplify this for people to think about and produce their own model to make decisions is FOMO. Unfortunately, scarcity-based systems have more virality to them because of FOMO, fear of missing out, than post-scarce systems. So if you look at it from an economic standpoint, the availability of any extraordinarily good, free, and open technology can and always will be used by a closed source, proprietary, monopolistic government or company that then gives them an even upper hand at creating asymmetry in the market, which is Pareto efficiency, using it to extract money, manipulate, market, oppress, subliminally or not anybody. So all the tools that are available to amplify the voice of the any person to bring a leveling of the field for all peoples is also the same technology that can be harnessed to create FOMO, greed, attention,
Yes.
status, virtue
Absolutely.
signaling. So the way that we are actually able to take these vampire systems and stab them in the heart is that they have a subtle effect to them, which is scarcity-based systems. Because they are zero sum, win lose, you can ploy this against them. Let's take a good example here of Bitcoin versus cash. If you go to a store that happens to accept both, it is strategic to always pay with the undervalued currency. So let's say nobody had heard of Bitcoin before, and the store is offering Bitcoin, and you realize, hey, cash is scarce, it's valuable to me, so I'm gonna hoard it, I'm gonna keep it, I'm not gonna miss out on cash, I'm gonna pay with Bitcoin. The cool thing about currencies, though, is that a currency is as effective as its distribution, as effective as its liquidity. So the more people that are using Bitcoin instead of cash actually brings the value of cash down and the value of Bitcoin up. But then there's this crossover point where, well, now Bitcoin is worth more than cash. So when you go to the store again, you're like, ha, 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 ha. If you're actually smart, you're going to be adversarial against the market and pay with cash instead of Bitcoin. Unfortunately, now Bitcoin and cash, these zero-sum systems, get stuck in specifically duopolistic two-party systems, headbutting against each other. All other options fall away. And that's because of this type of Pareto efficiency, that there really winds up only being room for competition between two winners that are stuck headlocked against each other. And oftentimes, these two systems headlocked against each other realize that they can game the system even more by being the same parent company or the same political collusion behind the scenes. So that way, they are able to create a type of anti-monopoly against any third-party competing systems in order to keep their duopoly in place. Now, oftentimes, you don't need the type of collusion going on behind the scenes because duopolies just naturally get in this headbutting against each other. There's plenty of drama going on in those.
Yeah.
You don't need to fake it, but some places will, some industries do. And I argue ultimately, capitalism, socialism, left versus right, they're still transactional debt-based systems. So at the end of the day, they're the same thing, and they're just trying to either manipulate you for emotional extraction of money or emotional extraction of voting. So I'm getting a little bit distracted, but coming back to where we're at, sorry, not where we're at, but where we were discussing, is that these duopolistic systems headbutting against each other cannot progress or advance any further because the natural unsaid or mentally aware thing any actor in that economy is going to do is, pay with Bitcoin when cash is more valuable, and then pay with cash when Bitcoin is more valuable. They might be laggards, they might not be timing the market right, or they're timing the market right. But those systems get stuck in that type of homeostasis. That's effectively a flat line. Even if it's going up and down, up and down, up and down, they get stuck in that flat line. So those two systems as a whole do not progress any further. And that's where the introduction of like Airbnb and Uber and some of these post-scarce or reputational systems start having an adversarial advantage over the FOMO systems. But again, I want to be very, very clear is that for any utopian society, any good ideas, there's always going to be a FOMO or a capitalist or a socialist that knows how to come in, use that utopian technology, that utopian network for exploitation. So you cannot have good systems that do not have virality to them, okay? Because you're going to wind up losing those good systems out to the scarcity systems or the debt-based systems that know how to ploy and exploit. And that's why oftentimes these good ideas, the internet as what it should be and what we had for a little bit,
early 90s,
what Engelbart imagined, don't wind up emerging because the smartest, cleverest of people will wind up playing both games, not one game. And so it's hard for people like me that primarily plays this one game and not playing the other game to really, and this is now where my thinking is changing, and the way I'm trying to get people to think about these systems is changing, is no, we need to now look at understanding this zero-sum system and say, hey, okay, if somebody can go into a store and get free stuff because they're an Instagram influencer, because that's going to then market whatever the company it is that's trying to get, whether it's the grocery store or an ice cream store, then of course that Instagram follower, the Instagram influencer is going to keep both Bitcoin and cash. And so now Bitcoin and cash cannot compete against reputation or popularity if played right. Now, popularity and reputation lead to a worse dystopia than Bitcoin or cash. But
it leads to popularity, yes.
Yeah, and which then leads to monopolies and authoritarianism. But the fact that authoritarianism and monopolies have this type of very seductive, viral, attractive nature to them, their own type of Pareto efficiency, Pareto optimization, means we now have a well-known, mathematically at least, economic game that we can use fire for fire against zero-sum games like socialism or capitalism, debt, money, cash, Bitcoin, whatever. And now it's just a matter of pairing the right combinations of these things to create better and better games that have more viral, more powerful, adoptive means. There's not going to ever be a revolution, because revolutions are usually bloody and end with a new tyranny. So anybody trying to sell a revolutionary system is going to have to convince enough people where 50% of those individuals are going to lose in order for the new mission to be established. Instead, you're going to see stuff that is invisible. So you're not going to see it. These systems are going to creep in. They're going to have a slightly better game than all the existing viral systems, as well as transactional systems. And then one day you're going to wake up and the whole world will have switched over, and you won't have known, you won't have noticed, because the conveniences and the technology is just that much more powerful, that much more seductive, that much more value add, and that much more efficient that, oh, hey, whoops, the whole internet is pretty much running off of open source technology, but people don't even really think about that. And then the same thing is going to happen in these other categories. It's going to be an invisible transition that's slow, but because the game is right and it outplays the virality of FOMO or transactional systems. Sorry to go on long there, but I think it's just a very important nuance to bring into perspective.
Yeah. So I'm trying to wrap my brain around this as far as so let's just talk about the solution then specifically, because, and the solution's always going to be imperfect. Solutions require experimentation and failure. It's just the way that it is. It's human nature and it's part of the human condition. It's an important part of the human condition, because if we can't learn from our mistakes, how are we ever supposed to improve? So, but where are these, as far as with GunDB and your Axe algorithm, where do you see these things coming in play to be able to create these environments where people are more engaged and creating better outcomes for themselves? I mean, I know you have a D.Tube is one thing that you have been building. You've been building a number of Meething, which Meething is actually very interesting to me. Let's talk about that. Let's talk some about your use cases, the things you're physically building, the things that you're actively building that has your philosophy behind it. So Meething is a conference similar to Zoom, what we're on right now, that is open source, that's able to be embedded into an enterprise or a business to where they can then use this technology to conference and video and audio without fear of centralized control from a Zoom or a Microsoft. So these types of tools, because I was thinking about this last night, I put a lot of thought into this, is that these things that you're building is that you're able to embed these into systems, and it's open source, and that you can create these tools in a more rich way that is open source. It's not being created by one centralized walled garden. Then isn't that like an in-run into capitalism? I mean, isn't that possibly a way to really start to build these things and give the tool set to businesses so they can be more open from these outside tools?
Yeah, every conversation, podcast, video you watch, I'm going to be screaming at the top of my lungs about lay people and a better society. But what you'll see me in action, which does not make me a hypocrite, is what you said at the very beginning of this call, is aligning the interests of governments, corporations, and individuals. Because there's no way to service individuals at a mass scale that you couldn't do by also serving governments and corporations.
Absolutely.
And individuals. So the way that you seduce individuals onto the technology is, you preach heavily about the ethics of what you're doing, and you'll see some people join your apps. However, if you really want to make a dent, then getting a single institution with 10 million monthly active users to switch over to your technology, the individuals, the lay people on the technology may not know it, but that corporation or enterprise switches over to it because it's more efficient. It lets them scale up more, or it costs less than the previous technology they were using. Suddenly onboards millions of people in one big go that nobody notices. And the same thing with governments, as though I'm very anti-authoritarian. I'm very scared of the monopolistic control of power that a government can have. It doesn't mean I'm not building technologies that empower people, enterprises, and governments, because that's the way you actually make step-by-step impact and change in the world that exists today. Now, this is not selling out. So we can.
Oh, it's not at all, because you're empowering people. People work at businesses. People are in government. It's people. They're everywhere.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Like I just got out of my long rant, is that these governments and corporations will then often use that technology to increase their bottom line or their margins or their asymmetry. But this is actually coming into the conversation more about the the tools for creative expression that I mentioned earlier as a completely separate subject, that, creating an open source version of Photoshop is what a lot of technologists have focused on. But all that did is at some point made Disney more money, because now Disney paid less to Adobe and switched over to using open source technology, and then still sold their stories and propaganda for money. And so if you want to explore this, I do think that's where this seduction of slow transition of systems comes into play, because at some point, right, when that open source technology becomes the industry standard, because all enterprises and all governments are using it, even if they're using it to unfortunately exploit people, that same technology is available to the individual, to a starving kid in Africa, to a upstart mom and pop shop. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to have an advantage over those companies. Certainly not. However, that is one step better in the world.
Yes.
Than the starving kid or the mom and pop shop having to pay thousands of dollars for proprietary, confusing technology that you then have to spend hundreds of dollars going through training and certification and just to use the technology to then compete against the governments and corporations. So again, a lot of this technology is on the freedom side because it's making the world slightly less bad. It's making the world, taking the world slightly away from the world we do not want. But that does not create rapid acceleration towards the world that we do want. So again, I'm just kind of giving you a choose your own adventure in this podcast. Yeah. You want to focus more on the meaning impact of these transitionary steps that are alignment with governments and corporations and individuals and more freedom-oriented discussion, or do you want to discuss more the acceleration of fairness and fusion?
Yeah, well, I'm really, and we're already into an hour, so I don't want to take too much of your time, but I want to kind of where we are right now, what you're talking about, this whole thing about business and government is it's something I'm very interested in. And there was something that I'm going to do, I'm working on my next podcast, which is talking about the marginalized consumer. And I wanted to use some of your thoughts in this because we were talking about this. It's just whenever you go for these broad strokes, that's where you invite authoritarianism. So I love the idea of how you describe that as being able to just kind of hit at it piece by piece. And the one thing with the marginalized consumer I was thinking about is a kind of a thought experiment of an app that would be a universal customer support framework. And something based on when you were talking about with your Meething application that was being embedded into corporations. I mean, I work I work for a motorcycle dealership, so I have to deal with vendors all the time, and I cannot believe how bad customer support has become. And to me, it's a really a reflection of the human condition more than anything else. So my thing is the fact of thinking of a way to help businesses communicate more effectively with their customers. And, you think about a welfare mother that is trying to get a medicine for her dying child of cancer and being stuck on hold and through these infinite loops of just insanity of trying to get through these businesses. So when you think about some of these specific things that could be done, to me, it would be an open source solution to provide to businesses to allow the person on the one end to identify their problem, and then on the other end, inside the enterprise, embedded in them, to find the people that most relate to that person's problem, and to use algorithms and AI to be able to align these interests of within the businesses. Because I can't even calculate how much money is wasted in anxiety and depression and time of people on hold and not being able to get through. I mean, Microsoft, this is what actually started this whole thing. I went to Microsoft to try to download Windows 10 Pro. And I had a problem with it. I could not get through to Microsoft. And I tried to dispute the bill. I could not. It's all through a bot. And I'm thinking, this is a $1.6 trillion market cap company, and their customer support is horrific. But you think about that, take that across all of the enterprises, all the businesses in the world, and the amount of headaches that that's creating for people. I'm arguing for the people. That's what I'm doing. But the thing is, I don't want to argue for the people to take down the business, is the point you're bringing up, because revolution is not going to work. You're just going to create opportunities for authoritarianism. So what about that idea of these, just like what you did with Meething, of creating these little pockets of applications that are outsourced? When the companies that are using these outsourced tools then gain from people developing these outsourced. So maybe this customer service app is not working that well, but then you get teams of developers on the outside that are building it, as opposed to their internal consultants and their internal people, because they obviously haven't built it. So I like that idea without this thread about the fact of using open source to tie in people closer and align them into business and government and themselves.
Yeah, two things here. First, which is what we were discussing before, all the nonprofits, startups, organizations, and people in my community building on top of my technology, things like D.Tube and Meething and even Internet Archive and the other ones that you mentioned, all that again has that game problem where it will be used by corporations for their own advantage to increase their margins. And then the second piece here, okay, is that oftentimes these bugs are the features of the system. They're not bugs. Oppressive systems that are trying to create walled gardens or proprietary systems or any type of transactional systems thrive off of creating headaches, thrive off of creating sickness and problems and insecurities. So it is so easy, and I've just my entire life been like, oh, we'll create a solution for this headache, and the whole world will switch over to this, because who doesn't have this? No, actually, for the establishment and the mainstream and the systems that out there, AT&T, I'm going to call out, right? I think you called out Microsoft. I'm going to call out AT&T. No, these are features of their systems that cause these headaches. They're not bugs. I know that it seems like bugs, but there's no way we're able, either we build better technology and it's open source and it's used to increase margins, but it's not going to be used to fix the bugs and problems that are intentional to the system, or whether it could be unintentional. So I don't know if I agree with your premise here of the question, is that creating technologies that solves those pain points, because oftentimes I'm arguing those pain points, those headaches, is actually what the whole system thrives off of.
Well, yeah, but yes, and I agree with you. But my thing is there ways to inject those into the system? Because what is the alternative? Is that, are we just? I mean, what is the alternative to that? That pain point? How does that fixed? I mean, so are we just going to continue in the next 50 years increasingly be marginalized as consumers, or what is that? And that's why the reason I brought this up is to actually bring in possibly new ideas or conversations, just like what you're doing, which I love the fact of the way that you presented that, because it is feature sets. So Microsoft clearly could fix this problem. Clearly, they have enough money. So how do we, those are the things that the emergence is a part of. I want to get into the difficult part of how do we solve these things. And you can't force Microsoft or AT&T to do this, but can you, like I said before, can you do an end run around them? Can you build open source to where because I don't know, do they just sit there chomping on their cigars, say, ha, 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 I love those marginalized consumers, those suckers? I mean, I don't think they're necessarily doing that. Are they just so freaking enmeshed in the profit where they don't pay attention to that? I have such a hard time of figuring out why these systems are being allowed to prosper like this.
Yeah, three things, and I'll try and actually get to my answers, because I do think one of the unique things about me is that is I'm proposing a lot of solutions, although in most of my podcasts, I'm usually explaining to people what the problems are and how to think about them. So let's still do a little bit more of that first, okay? No, it's the AI of many humans together forming a collective human mindset. So and that's also why I'm afraid of AI itself as a computer, because the computer as an AI is more likely to chomp on its cigar and be like, ha, 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 ha. The marginalization of consumers is what works. So yes, we will see over the next 50 years, without you, me, and people listening, battling against the marginalization of consumers, that will increase. And AI, from a machine standpoint, will do that pretty much consciously. Will do it voluntarily, because that's where the numbers work. As far as CEOs and humans and boards, no, I don't think most of them are doing this intentionally. It's just that when you take 7 humans and put them in a board and you have them vote on things, the emergent result, okay, is an AI-like decision, because all the trained thinking of each of the individual human brains now coming together in a trained voting pool, which is voting based off of some sort of optimization or heuristic. So humans are collectively forming a human type AI decision. And the reason why this emerges, the second point, is that what I mentioned earlier, the greatest way to be a lifting tide to all of humanity and to empower people and to move the world forward is through incrementalism. And incrementalism means making a lot of compromises, working with China and the firewall. It means making what on the surface level to the public consumer market looks like unethical decisions. But in reality, if AT&T can service, 100,000 more people in some rural countryside because the FCC gives them some sort of monopolistic airwave, radio wave rights, which I think AT&T spends $10 billion a year just to have a certain frequency that they're able to.
Oh God, yeah. I've been on the auctions on FCC. Is just crazy.
Right.
These big companies. Yep.
So it's not that they're chomping the cigars thinking we're going to marginalize people. It's they realize if we make a sacrifice here or compromise there or work with China there, we're able to cater a value-added service that empowers people just a little bit better than what they previously had to, hundreds of thousands, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people. So I do think it's easy for a lot of us in the decentralized technology kind of side of the equation to easily critique and not understand that, no, like Samsung and Apple have actually made police brutality more visible, because through capitalism and selling leading edge phones to a rich class and then trickling that down to a poorer class, we now all have phones that have cameras to be able to record authoritarian governments committing completely vile crimes. And it's not that police brutality is increased. No, it's more visible now.
Yes.
More people to watch it, and that is like unsettling. That is scary. So, which would you? Now I'm going to challenge even my own thinking, right? And our own thinking. Which would we rather have? This utopian world where we're trying to have spyware-free phones the NSA is not spying on, and these flagship phones that don't have any malware installed on them and Facebook tracking our every move, or more police brutality or less awareness of police brutality. I do think that we're slowly moving in a better direction. Unfortunately, that is coming through Pareto efficiency, which is better described as the marginalization of consumers, and that will hit a certain point in which the pendulum swings the other direction. And now this is on to the third point, which is politics, economics, and the technology unbuilding. This is where, yes, the marginalized single mother with a child that has cancer going back and forth on these phone calls, getting stuck in this loop, it will become worse with AI, okay? But that is exactly why there's a rise of political extremism in ideologies, because now the government can come along and say, hey, I promise to solve all these problems you're having, vote for me, right? And that just leads to a risk of systemic authoritarianism through a government which has monopoly on force action. And they guise it very well, right? They talk about the problems like we're talking about, all this monopolistic antitrust that needs to be regulated. We will fix that for you. Just give us your vote and we will solve all these problems and take the money from these monopolistic billionaires and rain it on you so that way you have all of your problems solved. Well, no, that's just trading one tyrant for another tyrant. I'd much rather have a tyrant of money than a tyrant of force. So how do we now solve and fix this? Well, we've discussed a lot of the frameworks and the thinking and the heuristics and the mental models to understand these different systems. And I'm going to now combine them. Yes, which is an economic system where, if actually to give it context, capitalism we can define as the production of goods as incentivized by individuals. You can think of socialism as the distribution of goods as incentivized by the public whole or the state. Freeism, which also could lead to a type of dystopia. You have to be very careful with these systems. But as a whole, in the same way I gave the explanation earlier about focusing on wealth being defined by distribution rather than hoarding, you can also think of Freeism from an economic standpoint as the production and distribution as incentivized by algorithms. So of course, the next question is who writes the algorithms? If it's controlled by China or Facebook, an individual company, or monopolistic by anybody, of course, it's going to lead to dystopian results. However, if the algorithms themselves can be decentralized, can be peer-to-peer, then you're dealing with that first part of freedom reducing the world we don't want. So that's just a priori foundation we have to have is these algorithms need to be decentralized in order to stop the bad future that we're going towards, to stop the marginalization. However, the best algorithm is going to be one that promotes fairness and fusion. And so a simple way to think about how we get around, coming back to your original question about Meething, how do we get Meething embedded inside of more companies, or how do we get Microsoft or AT&T to switch over to some of these more ethical systems, is to introduce marketplaces. And marketplaces create competition. So regardless of whether the technology is proprietary or not, that type of competition moves markets and causes AT&T and Microsoft to be less competitive. So take things like Uber transforming the taxi industry through scofflaw. Take things like Airbnb. What we need to do is now pair open source technology, things like, I can't believe I'm saying this, blockchain, peer-to-peer systems, although blockchain has its own problems, with specifically marketplaces. And I know a lot of people talk about Ethereum and Bitcoin as being like transactional wallets, you're moving money around. So you think of it as a marketplace, but no, like, sorry, a wallet and a money is not a marketplace. Sure, you can use it in a marketplace, but a marketplace is a matching of offerings. That's what Airbnb and Uber does. It's an algorithm. It's even what Amazon does. You don't see that in Ethereum or Bitcoin, okay? It's just a mechanism for exchanging money. It doesn't provide a marketplace for exchanging money. The Silk Road was more of a marketplace. It just unfortunately catered to people who needed to do it illegally and anonymously. So there's you have to design systems that inject marketplaces into legal corporations, enterprises, and governments. Okay, so that way you get the ethics and the non-illegal or sketchy material, but you're then using that to combat the authoritarian or monopolization of that of the current system. And that's hard to do because it is necessarily adversarial and against the interests of that government or that enterprise if they see the long game. So a concrete example of how we're doing this is a browser extension called Private Party. There's also people building on top of our technology called Maskbook that's also built on top of us. So check out both party.lol as well as maskbook.com. What it does, it says, hey, you know what? Let the $200,000 paid engineers at Facebook, Google, Tinder, Twitter, all those apps create those billion-dollar user experiences that are really glitchy and still don't work and frustrate us. But apparently, those are the user interfaces people are using, right? So even though they have these headaches to them, we don't know why these billion-dollar companies have, trillion-dollar
yeah, exactly.
have these headaches in them. Whatever, it's still the user interfaces that people are using. So they've outcompeted other interfaces. We don't know why, but they have. So what if we can create an overlay network where everything you post on Facebook, everything you post on Twitter is encrypted end to end if you care about privacy. Turns out most people don't care about privacy, but let's just use this as two examples of apps that are concrete. Yeah, now we're on Facebook and we are having end-to-end encrypted messages between our friends. This already exists. You can go and install it and do this today. And you're using Facebook's interface, but Facebook cannot read your data. So it's exactly the solution that everybody was crying for with the congressional hearing. But what we learned from 2 years ago to today is that economic opportunity is more important to people than privacy. So privacy just is, again, one of those things of batting off evil. And ultimately, when you live in an oppressed society, taking a little bit more evil is tolerable in contrast to needing to pay the bills, get hired, do what you can to make socioeconomic success. So it turns out that the actual amount of time you're sending nudes to your spouse or your girlfriend or whatnot, or having a text message with your mom that you want to keep private or your friends is not that significant compared to you needing to be on LinkedIn or on Twitter and posting to Reddit and hustling. Those may be the things you're not doing, right? Hustling on Twitter and LinkedIn, blah, 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 social media, Instagram life, because it's exhausting, but that's the thing that needs to be done in order to be heard, level up your career, get job opportunities, have recruiters talking to you, and all that stuff is public, right? It's actually a matchmaking algorithm. It's effectively you're saying, hey, I'm a driver in a car and I want to drive passengers around. Uber, please matchmake me. Well, hey, I'm on LinkedIn. I have these skill sets. Hey, please matchmake me. That is public information you're trying to give out in larger volumes. It's not private. You're not trying to keep that secret. You're trying to actually say, hey, I have these skill sets. Please share this with everyone. It's the opposite of Facebook, right? It's hey, keep my photo of my kids private. I don't want to share that with anybody other than my family. So why is it that when we're saying, please share that I'm good at JavaScript, or I'm good at telemarketing, or I'm good at HR, that those are all the platforms that do not wind up automatically sharing you and your information to people? It's absurd. I'm laughing because I'm trying to make people realize just how absurd these systems are. Everything from we need Samsung and Apple to to help stop police brutality. Like that is absurd. To why is it Facebook is sharing our private information that we don't want to advertise more than the information that we have on LinkedIn and we're trying to post to social media and Twitter is not getting shared. It's just backwards on all accounts. And the reason why it's backwards is because if you want to share something, then, we can ask you to pay for it, to advertise for it, because we know that's what you want. So we're going to exploit you and say, you want to share something? Our algorithms are going to oppress you automatically until you wind up paying. And this is how dating apps work as well, right? You're on dating apps, and then it's just going to oppress you until you wind up paying money. And Facebook and a lot of these systems are like really destructive in how they design their algorithms, because they're designed like lottery machines. When when you first sign up, they give you a little bit of a splash, whether this be Facebook or a dating app. Like advertising on Facebook or a dating app. They give you a little bit of a splash, so you get excited, you get your dopamine reaction, and then they slowly dry it up. Then eventually they convince you to pay some money, and they give you a big dopamine hit, and then they slowly dry it up. So that way you then pay. So that way you think, it worked. I just need to put more money into the slot machine, and then they give you a bigger dopamine hit. But then they intentionally dry it up because they own and control the network, and they know that what you're trying to do is get your resume out. However, the inverse, if you have private photos of your breakfast and your children and your dog, they know that you don't want that information shared. But that is oftentimes the exact then information about your personal lifestyle that they can use to figure out what you're going to buy on the flip side, right?
Absolutely.
So the entire market is adversarial and backwards and headachy because of all these things. Sorry, I just went into explanation of problems, not solutions.
Yeah, but it serves the solutions well to really understand that, because that is the core of it. Is one thing I've been researching a bit is on cybernetics, on systems and components of systems, and they're relying on feedback. And to me, the true gold in this connection is the feedback. So, and when our feedback is manipulated by exactly what you're talking about, don't even get me started on LinkedIn, because LinkedIn used to be a great tool until Microsoft bought it, because I was a recruiter and I used to use it, and I've just been amazed of how much what they do is that they take away the articulations of the user to be able to truly tune to find things that resonate with them. It's all about this reliance on this algorithm of what they feel that you need to be able to optimize their network. And so one thing that you had bundled in there, you were talking about this encrypted layer over Facebook. Okay, so that was ding ding. that really kind of hit me there. So are you talking?
But I'm now building up to the next most.
Okay, go ahead. Yep.
Which is rather than it being private party, which you're only using for not very often for you're texting your mom and stuff, is actually, well, wait a second. Blockchain and the crypto communities and the D-Web communities, they all need to be actually focused on building public party. These overlay networks that amplify your voice, because now we're able to invert the inversion. So the cleverness here that I'm saying is, if we create a tool, and we are, it's not done yet, but come join our community if you want help. If we create a tool that makes it easier for you to automatically post yourself, your startup, your garage band, your whatever it is, your resume, across all the platforms, then that's going to increase your voice just slightly, statistically, a little bit more. Versus right now, I have the problem, I pretty much only post to Twitter, which means only people on Twitter are going to wind up hearing me, and in my own echo chamber, right? So if every single time I posted to Twitter, it also automatically posted to LinkedIn, to Facebook, etc. I know there are certain platforms you don't want to include when you're posting stuff because of the nature of it, but having tools that more easily allow you to cross post publicly rather than privately on these platforms and private is very important, is slightly now how we start changing the game, because before, Disney would come along, find designers using open source creativity tools, and then sell the results of their work without having to pay Adobe. But now, if you're focusing on these network effects, these fairness, these algorithms things, which is you as an HR person already on LinkedIn, as an individual human, realize, hey, you can up your game inside of the company that you're at against the, your colleagues if you're trying to get a promotion, or if you're trying to just be more effective by using this public party browser extension, because now you have something that empowers your workplace productivity, and that gets you better economic opportunity. But slowly, as then your colleagues hear about it to compete against you, and then people across different networking platforms, not just LinkedIn, start using it, okay? Competing companies, competing organizations are all starting to use this platform. You secretly, accidentally start having a CRM that's a Salesforce competitor without any of the HR and PR people really knowing it, because now all the HR people signed up to use this tool, but that tool is fundamentally a network. But you don't reveal it's a network until they're all using it. Now you're able to eliminate LinkedIn because it's going to be faster for any of those HR people to post using this tool and have it automatically cross-post across all of the platforms rather than just LinkedIn. And the point that it's now getting posted across all the platforms, suddenly we can use Facebook's interface for LinkedIn style content. We can use Twitter's interface for Instagram style content. I don't know why you'd want to do this. I'm just saying that you're able to run around, as you mentioned, these walled gardens because you're competing with them in areas that enhance them, but is not obvious to the company's bottom line. And so a concrete example of this is, again, Disney will use creative tools to decrease their costs, okay? Because now they don't have to pay for the Adobe seat for the new designer that they're hiring. However, what I'm trying to invert it is that if you have these open networks versus open creativity tools, suddenly you're actually appealing to the employees at the company, because the employees are choosing to use these tools to increase their competitive advantage. And the parent company is oblivious to it. And the parent company just winds up being like, hey, we need to hire more of these people who are somehow getting 10x done in half the time. They don't realize that those people are using that tool. And as that tool then becomes adopted slowly by everybody, suddenly the parent company no longer has its strategic hold, because if all the people who were on LinkedIn are now on this browser extension to empower their LinkedIn usage, they can just use the browser extension by itself, regardless of whether they're using LinkedIn or not. And suddenly you get this collapse of Facebook or LinkedIn or these other institutions. And that's how you slowly erode away at the foundation underneath these large monopolies without them realizing. So now I'm giving my cards away because any Disney exec will come along and be like,
what are you doing? Well, how will Facebook and LinkedIn allow this extension to interact with their content?
That's actually part of the metagame I'm playing, because there are certain signals that we put into the encrypted messages that make it easier for Facebook to track. So that way Facebook tries to ban us. And there have been kind of some ups and downs, and this is on the privacy side, because those are that's the bait that journalists love. So you actually want to create drama in a marketplace.
Oh, I see.
So
Yeah.
this sounds terrible, but like,
No, it doesn't.
Steve Jobs and Bill Gates were inventing a new market of PC, personal computing. Before, people only imagined computers were going to be used by businesses, thus IBM, International Business Machines. So part of the way that you can drum up attention for a new market, this is what the blockchain community has done with all their terrible drama, is by becoming dramatic. It's also what politicians do. Before they go out on the stage to debate each other, they basically agree, hey, throw a punch at me. So that way we get eyeballs, we get CNN or Fox to do a highlight reel. The more eyeballs and attention you have, even if it's coming through drama, creates awareness of a new market. So yeah, it's
Well, and also, I'm real quick. Why do I think this is going to be a Firefox extension exclusively? Is that true?
No, actually,
It's not.
And unfortunately for market penetration, Chrome has not only 60% of the market, but a lot of the competing browsers are now using Chrome underneath. So it best works on Chrome, and it's supposed to work on Firefox, but the QA, the quality assurance on that is probably much more buggy on Firefox.
I got you.
I want to be clear, all of this technology is very recent, so they all are extremely buggy, and also they're extremely buggy because we're trying to co-opt existing websites, and so those websites change things, they break things, and that messes stuff up. So it is a battle. We'll always be at a disadvantage, but there's some cool things where this is a crazy idea. It's probably not going to relate to the audience that's listening, but in the same way, we've trained cars to drive by having millions of hours of driving footage that the car learns from.
Mm-hmm.
Well, guess what? It's pretty easy for us to get millions of hours of what websites look like and how buttons work and interactions. So one of the things I want to do in the future, we haven't even started, I've talked about it, haven't even started, is to train an AI on interfaces. So that way we can effectively have a more accurate way of hijacking Facebook and Twitter and any other random website you're going to, because rather than us having to kind of learn how the websites work and create heuristics and potentially do hard-coded features for each website, well, now we just kind of have an AI model that knows how websites behave in general. And so it doesn't matter whether it's Facebook or Twitter or a random website you've never heard of. The AI model is going to be well trained against that. And that's also like a future for ad blocking as well, right? Like AI-based detection of where ads are placed rather than these whitelist blacklists that create these cat and mouse games that companies play. So
yeah, and then is this going to basically then be a browser that taps into your peer-to-peer network through GunDB that's driven? This data that is shared is going to be, the backend is going to be GunDB, which is serving off of multiple computers all over the world, correct?
Yeah, serving off of your own computer. So it's peer-to-peer, correct.
Okay. And then how are you going to monetize this layer above of our reality? You're creating a new layer through this extension, through the browser, which I absolutely agree with. The browsers are built. That is the gateway. How are you going to monetize that? How's GunDB going to monetize that?
Well, three things to your question, one of which I'll talk about monetization. First, actually, even though I'm saying, hey, this hot new thing that's going to help us invisibly transfer systems over and undermine the existing systems as browser extensions, those are also the hardest places to play because operating systems and browsers have the biggest lock-in. Even though there's competing options, people don't want to switch browsers or switch operating systems. So they're actually a bad place to start. Just to clarify things, the real way we're creating the technology and it's available for people to use, but we don't expect to have as high of an adoption curve that we have had on things like D.Tube and these other websites that use our technology, because those are websites that are already popular. They switch over, and thus the network grows. the way we're fixing the adoption curve is by designing and building games that get people to use the systems. That's a whole other conversation. The second category here is profit. If you can't already tell, it's not my motive.
Sure.
I will become the world's richest man if I can switch everybody over to a new economic system, which I have designed. Hopefully, I've not designed it for my own gain. Okay. Hopefully, I've not designed it for my own exploitation. But sure, if I understand how my economic system works, and it is a good economic system such that more people wind up joining it. If I'm the first mover in that game, that gives me an adversarial advantage over everybody else, even though I do not believe in adversarial advantages. So I would much rather shoot for my long-term success of, being a Tim Berners-Lee that invented the internet. And Tim Berners-Lee is an academic. Look, he basically has an unlimited position at MIT.
Yes.
So
yes.
If you think about his values, which would Tim Berners-Lee rather be? Jeff Bezos at Amazon with billions of dollars?
Yep.
When Tim Berners-Lee clearly didn't care about money from the beginning, or meanwhile, sure, he could have used more money. I'm sure he would appreciate money. Or as an academic, does he care about having academic status, right? That's the game he's playing, or had played. I'm sure everybody wants both money and the
status. Yep.
But Tim Berners-Lee definitely got what he wanted. Hopefully he gets more. He deserves more. So I would much rather likewise win the game I care to play, which is long-term value add creation, because that means it creates a better world for me to fundamentally live in. And I'm ideally famous and have a good reputation for that. And that will let me then play the next game after that, which, yes, I've already thought of, but it is so way out there.
Yeah. Okay.
I didn't even talk to people. Talking to people about decentralization, I thought was going to be easy enough, but woo! And then the third thing, which is, oh, great. Actually answering a question about
his monetization was the last one.
A very simple example that I will give you, it is not the main monetization strategy, is inverting these models again, which is saying, hey, all the content that you post via this browser extension or to the network by default is Creative Commons. Creative Commons is an intellectual property license that basically says it's effectively public domain. Anybody can use it, reuse it for the sake of greater good. Creative Commons is actually not public domains, and it's distinct from other open source licenses. But you don't need, if you're curious about licenses, there's tons of great resources and podcasts on that. I'm not going to set that.
Yeah.
So by default, it'll hard code and vendor lock people into using any person that comes along and is like, wow, I really like this song that I made, and I want to be this rich gangster that sells my song and keeps the proprietary IP to my song. When they click to change the license to be proprietary or copyrighted, it'll basically pop up and say, hey, pay for a monthly subscription. And if they go for that, they go for that, because having these types of proprietary, vendor-locked, copyrighted, monopolistic systems is the old game. And so anybody who wants to play that should already have the money to play that and will pay for it. That might sound a little bit unfair. It's like, hey, I created this thing. Why won't this thing let me post it without giving it away for free? Well, it's values alignment, right? Like, you don't have to use the tool. If it gives you an edge, like, embrace the edge that it gives you, because potentially the values of the system is what's giving you that edge. But if you do want to make it then proprietary, then you have two options. Pirate the technology, which is easy because it's open source. You download the source code, you fork it, you go into the source code and you change that one line of code to allow to default the license to being proprietary, and then you'd reinstall the software, right? And then you use it that way. But most people are too lazy to do that. So I'll let pirates be pirates. If a pirate is that cheap in order to try and make money by selling proprietary songs on a free platform that they then pirate the technology to not pay for it, then they're just working against their own values and game. So I'm not gonna DMCA or hunt down anybody that pirates the technology and changes.
Okay. Yeah,
Okay.
truly
But most
It
people,
truly is open source.
yeah, most people are just going to be like, oh, well, maybe I do want to sell this song rather than give it away for free, or I do want to maintain copyright to it and not allow other people to remix it. So I'm going to pay the $20 or the $9 a month subscription. Again, the weird thing about this is they're not actually paying for a monthly service. There is no server. There is no back end that is happening. All they're just paying for is convenience of opting back into a worse system that plays by money. And so they're going to have to pay for that. So now taking that concrete example and kicking it up a notch to the meta layer, which I'm really good at, philosophy, although I lose a lot of people who don't care about those things, is if you're creating utopia, you want to create, if you're creating a utopia that you do not want to fall to the Persian Empire or fall to the Spartans or fall to monopolies or antitrust or Facebook or Disney, if you want to create a utopia that is well fortified, you want to tax the boundaries of the system, not inbound, but outbound. So it's free for anybody to come in, okay? But to go back out, you want to put an export tariff on it. That doesn't seem, I don't like those systems. But ultimately, am I going to try and game both games? Yes, I'm going to use, just like Disney, open source creativity tools to create better art faster and then not pay Adobe, right? So the game itself, in order to survive this Pareto efficiency and FOMO problem, needs to be rigged against those systems. It's easy for you to pay, and it's not even paying. It's easy for you to use your reputational currency and hoard Bitcoin and cash, so that way more people use this system because they still attach value to cash and Bitcoin. But then once you're in the system, if you ever want to cash back out or Bitcoin back out or export, then there's no reason why that system should be as easy as possible or as, quote, ethical as possible for you to take the goods from inside of that utopian state back out into the cronyism of the external world. Because if it makes it easy for you to opt back into that cronyistic, monopolistic, debt-based model, the utopian society is never going to get enough of accumulation of people, enough stability in order for it to outcompete those other systems such that it wins entirely. There's always going to be this competition back and forth, which always means there's going to be human suffering as a result of the existence of those debt-based or scarcity-based systems. So I think it is fair to say tax and put an export tariff. Anybody that's trying to opt back into an immoral system, it is okay for us to play the game and put in barriers and user experience errors and headaches and problems and friction and money and payments and debt in order for you to go back to being a slave. Because yes, that disincentivizes you from turning yourself into a marginalized consumer. And maybe it's a little bit, unethical in terms of, hey, it's your choice, do what you want, but at least it's creating a game that is more self-fortified.
So on this layer that you have, is that going to have its own ad model that's outside the system?
What do you mean by ads? That's advertisements. I'm generally speaking against advertisements because that's how you lead to propaganda and misinformation.
Oh,
but I have a lot of contrarian thoughts on decentralization and advertising, and various ways to make them work in the meanwhile in order to co-opt systems and switch them over. However, we've spent 2 hours talking about the philosophical economic examples of these games. So I could spend another easily 2 hours on technical implementations of each of these things down to the mathematics, but you can, read some of the articles or watch some of the talks. Advertising itself is a whole category on its own that I've written some articles on the personal platform. I'll send you a link on it. That, as well as secure rendering, which is kind of related to that, although most people wouldn't realize is related, that we could spend 2 hours just on a high level subject alone, not even the implementation details. So we should maybe save that for a different podcast.
Oh yeah, no problem. Well, my thought on advertising is it's not advertising if you're interested. So I go back to the fact of these tools to align values of people, and it sounds like there probably will be some type of an app layer on this layer that you're creating, that open source developers create these filters and tools for people to align the values between themselves and service providers. Pretty much correct?
Yes, technologically, we're finally starting to get there. I mean, there's a bunch of startups, nonprofits, and organizations that have already built apps using my technology. You've probably heard about, whether it be Internet Archive or D.Tube or some of the ones that you mentioned. And a lot of people haven't heard about me specifically or my technology because, my technology is invisible to the systems that they're using. And that's something we discussed earlier. But I'm finally starting to get to the point where my community and me should be hopefully pushing out some flagship products, applications in the next 2 years. It's still so far away. That is branded by us, not just an app that is built with my technology or by people in our community. It's extremely important that I keep on promoting the applications that are built by people in my community, because that is our community. It's just the cool things that the values of our community is that applications should compete on their experiences, not on the data underneath. So if you wind up using these other applications, not the ones that's branded by me specifically, and then decide to try out my branded version, it's all your own same data. Like you're not having to start something new. Likewise, because we're so focused on the technology side and scaling things up and catering to all these developers and nonprofits and organizations, that we somehow fail to be feature complete or fast enough at releasing applications. So you think that our applications suck, but you started with us. It's you just switch over to the other application and everything that you had is already available there because it's not going anywhere. These applications are logging into you, not you logging into Facebook.
That's exactly it.
I've
written about that.
Logging into the application. The application is logging into you, and that can still sound scary. When the application logs into you, it's not exfiltrating and taking and stealing your data. All that data is still staying with you. The application. See, this is going into some of the more detailed explanations around how like advertising models would work.
And we can also move this. I just wanted to introduce my audience to you, and we can move forward. We'll definitely be following you. But I can tell you, my intro episode of The Emergence, I talk about apps logging into you. That's the fundamental of the emergence, because if we don't have that control over our own experiences, input, output, IO, then we are continue to be influenced and guided and zombified. So I think that's a great note to more or less kind of start to wrap this up on, because we could probably go on until tomorrow morning talking about these things. So that is super interesting. You really hit it hard on that last piece. So super interesting, Mark, super interesting. And so do you have any questions for me at all?
Well, I'm glad you're already ahead of the game. You're already talking about this before I can mention it. So that's very exciting, because I do think the more people like you and anybody who's listening can get out there and talk about these ideas and state these ideas and promote awareness of it, does serve the greater good in terms of change through proactive evangelism. The good news is, if these things work, it won't have to be evangelism alone, right?
Exactly.
These systems will invisibly start showing up. So for you specifically, it sounds like you are trying. I'm not as well versed with your goals, other than the alignment that you've talked about from our conversations. Is there a specific application, a specific technology that you are trying to build or want to build?
I've tried to build technology in the past and went down burning flames. I'm less interested I would like to actually be a part of building technology and being involved with building technology. And at this point, the emergence is really more about the fact of creating awareness around these ideas, meeting the thinkers, the technologists, and imparting these ideas into the politicians, the CEOs. That's a major part of the emergence that I want to do, is that this outreach. I think there's a lot of politicians out there that are smarter than we give them credit for, that would probably like some of these things. It's just not this government and business. That's why I actually have a ring. I call it a unity ring, and it has 3 bands on it. It's people, government, and business. And I'm passionate about using technology to make the connection between the 3. And there's good people in all of them. And there's bad people as individuals. There's bad people in politics. There's bad people in business, but there's good people in all of them. And I think we can build these technologies. So I really, this first leg of my trip and journey with the emergence, which I hope lasts for many, many years, is to identify these technologies and the technologists and the thought leaders in this space. And then as I find technologies that maybe I can be a part of to help find funding for, it's another thing I want the emergence to do, is I want to create awareness so people that have money can help fund these technologies that's going to help better societies. And then eventually I have a number of things I've wanted to build that I've been writing down. I have a friend that I've developed things with that, this word explorer ideas and that I'd like to build in the future. But right now, probably for the next year, it's just about building relationships, talking to interesting people like you. That has been fantastic. I really was chomping at the bit to be able to have an in-depth conversation with you, because I knew there was a lot there. So mine is about the evangelism and really aligning people and creating awareness around these ideas that we have to build these things. You just look around. We have to build these things, and we have to build towards a society that is more mindful of a clean environment, justice for all, opportunities for all, without sacrificing the system. Because when you sacrifice the integrity of the overall system, that's when tyrannies come in. It's been played over and over again. That's what attracted to me as well, is that I see this measured mindset, because I don't want to overthrow capitalism as bad as some elements of it can be, but it needs to go back to more of its purest thoughts. Adam Smith did not envision, he didn't actually even come up with the word capitalism. So he didn't envision this, where the stakeholder had so much influence and the Enlightenment thinkers didn't imagine how government was going to be so tied in with lobbyists and business. So it's time. We've got the technology, and that's why I've been thinking about these technologies for 20 years and writing about them. And the reason I'm really surfacing this is because I finally see they're here. people like you and Tim Berners-Lee and Vitalik Buterin are starting to build these things and talk about these things. So I'm just a little bit old for the game, but I've got another 20 years to play. So I'm here and I'm not going anywhere.
And you're doing a great job. Thanks so much for the compliments. And it's never too late, as you're saying. It's only the beginning, and the first people on this curve are the ones that are going to have the impact at the transformation to the economy and to society. So all the listeners and me and you, this is the game we're playing, and it's for the better of all of us to create, hopefully, free products, more free people, and more flourishing planet.
God, it's beautiful.
And people,
and people can find you on Twitter at Mark Nadal, Nadal, right?
Yep, that's currently where I'm doting out my largest audience and platform after getting shut down from the last platform I was on. And hopefully I won't make the same mistake next time. So get me up there and I'll be tweeting about all the other platforms I'll be on.
Okay. And then I highly encourage people just to search your name on Google or Bing. And there's just a treasure trove of your presentations and speaking that you dig deep on these topics. So I highly engage my audience to go out there and search for you and to engage, and then to engage back and give you their feedback. So it's been a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate you taking your time out of your busy days, Mark. And we will be talking with you soon.
Thanks. Have a good one.
Okay. Bye.